I've been taking a shining to booing people. You know, it's
in
like
public.
no, well, yeah, actually, it's the most like dick thing that you can do, and everybody joins in on it. It's crazy.
The booing is so. What's like? Is someone talking, and then you just be like, "Boo"?
No, I'll give you some context. So I was at a birthday party on Saturday, an adult birthday party, and somebody spilled a drink on the table and like ruined this tablecloth, and I was just like, "Boo!" And everybody was like, "Boo!" Like other room was like, "Boo!"
Wow.
It's like the most satisfying thing to start a boo towards somebody else.
This always gets me back to the whole thing about negativity and how it spreads much quicker than positivity. Because I feel like if you started clapping, you just look like an asshole, and then everyone just kind of like awkwardly claps with you.
Yeah.
They're not happy to do it.
No.
I feel like with a boo, people are like, "Fuck yeah, I've been waiting for this for."
Yeah, I've been waiting to boo something for a long time.
Yeah, it's just been sitting there like boo, boo, boo.
It's really satisfying to do it too.
It's kind of like releasing anger without just looking like a crazy person. Like if you scream like "fuck," you're like that guy's he's having some problems.
Yeah.
But if you're like "boo," just like, "Oh shit, what is he booing at? I'm gonna start booing too."
Yeah. And then everybody's just like, "Oh, something sucks." Boo. Yeah.
Wicked smart, wicked cool, wicked fucking stupid, whatever the fuck. Something wicked.
I'm baking like a toasted teaser. It's so hot here.
My boy's wicked smart.
Cause the boy is hotter than hot. He's hot, hot.
Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained?
What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of Wicked Hot. Kevin and John. Kevin, this week we posted on the Instagram. What do we post? Who guessed it? Who didn't guess it?
So we posted a picture of a film cinema camera, Panavision, 35 millimeter. That was basically the premise for this entire episode.
That was basically it, yes.
Yes, and nobody got it.
Yeah, no one guessed it. But this week, guys, we are going to be doing another one of our history episodes. We had previously done this with the 3D movies, so if you want, you could check that out. I forget what episode number it is, but it says it in the title.
I think it's 8.
There you go.
And it's also some of the stuff that I talk about a little later about the digital stuff. You're going to want to know about 3D stuff because it kind of correlates with the digital and the 3D stuff, especially with Avatar.
Oh, yeah, and I think the 3D stuff is pretty interesting on its own, too. But this week, guys, we are going to be talking about the history of film, specifically from, like kind of the precursors to it all the way up to current digital age. I'm excited for it. This was a lot of interesting stuff that I was reading and very technical, and there were still some questions that I wanted to answer that weren't answered like in layman's terms, basically.
Yeah, I know my stuff. I'm going to have to try to break it down as much as possible into terms that normal people can understand, because even as somebody who went to film school, some of the stuff I didn't understand for the digital part. So you're handling the history of film in movies, and I'm handling mainly the digital age in filmmaking.
Yes. All right, guys. Well, let's get into it. We're starting history of film in 3, 2, 1. Get into it.
There's no movement in movies at all. They are still pictures. But when shown at 24 frames a second, through a light bulb, it creates the illusion of movement. So thus, as opposed to a recording device, when you're watching a movie, a film print, you are watching an illusion. And to me, that illusion is connected to the magic of movies.
So before we get into the idea of the first motion picture, I want to take you way, way back to the year 1878.
Damn.
So basically what happens here is British photographer Edward Muybridge, which, by the way, he spells Edward like a bitch.
How does he spell it?
Eadweard. W-A-R-D.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. That's what
That-
white people should.
That sounds like a hipster thing.
It's like Eod Weard. It's like, no, it's Edward. I'm like, okay, you're a bitch.
Yeah, and then that sounds like somebody who would get mad at the pronunciation, the wrong pronunciation of the.
Oh,
of
they
the
get
name.
so mad.
Yeah.
So mad. But yeah, so this whole started because Edward Muybridge was sponsored by the founder of Stanford University, Leland Stanford, to film a horse. So the whole idea behind it was to determine if when a horse was galloping, if it had all 4 feet off the ground at the same time. This is the only reason like all of this happened was because Stanford University founder wanted to basically conduct an experiment of are all the horse's feet airborne when it's galloping? That's it.
I feel like you don't need a movie for that.
I feel like you could easily see that and
That's just something you could look at. Just be like, hey, I want you to look at this horse and see if all the feet are off the ground at the same time, and then report back to me.
Leland Stanford had very high expectations. Like, I want you to design slow-mo film, never mind film, slow-mo film, so I can meticulously see. He's like wanted like the Kentucky Derby, like finish line camera made.
Yeah, he's definitely got some type of horse fetish that hasn't come out yet.
So, in 1879, Muybridge had silhouettes made so they can be projected onto a screen via a device he called a zoopraxiscope, and he was the one who invented it, and is actually considered as the first movie projector. The quote-unquote film in this instance looked basically like a vinyl record with a translucent border with sets of images displayed. So when the disc spun,
Oh, wow.
it projected the images as a cohesive movie. So literally think of a vinyl record, but instead of it being black, you have a translucent edge. And then say, for this instance, we're talking about the horse, right? He's
Right.
filming the horse. It's different pictures of the different, I guess, movement stages of the horse. So when it's spinning within the projector, it actually looks like a horse galloping.
Wow.
Yeah, it's crazy.
That is crazy. Did it happen to say how many frames per second it was?
I think it was 6.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah, it was very. Yeah, it was very rudimentary.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
So from the inspiration of Muybridge, the first motion picture camera was invented by a Frenchman named Louis Leprince. Louis Leprince. He patented a 16 lens camera in 1887. And this camera was actually operated by the first 8 lenses being triggered by an electromagnetic shutter on film. So he patented a 16 lens camera in 1887. And the way the camera operated was, and by the way, for people who wouldn't look this up to visualize, the camera looks like a box with legitimate 16 different fucking lenses on it.
Yeah,
So
when I think of that, I think of like the 50s camera that has a couple lenses on it, and they just like change it live.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it like you see it go like the depth of field, like go in and out as
Right.
they change the lens. Yeah, I can
Correct.
see that.
Yeah, usually 50s and 60s cameras had 3 lenses on it.
Yeah.
This had 16, but it was like a box. So the first 8 lenses were actually triggered by the film going through an electromagnetic shutter, and then the other 8 would operate on the film itself. So the first 8 are basically
Wow.
just there to basically start the shutter for the film to start being like whatever's being captured is really only being captured on the last row of 8 lenses.
Damn.
So the only reason that this wasn't successful was, as I mentioned, like you have 16 different lenses on a box, and each lens would capture the image from a different viewpoint. Slight variations, but when you
Right.
put it together, it just looks as if, basically, it's as if I put my hand in front of you and it looked like I had a ghost trail behind me.
Yeah.
So basically, almost like translucent versions of my hands that followed my actual solid hand.
yeah.
If that makes
for
sense.
for like the photography people, it's a slow shutter speed.
Okay.
basically picking up the hand like every step of the way. It's kind of like a choppiness.
Right. Which makes sense because this is technically being, slow shutter for considering you have to go through basically 16 different lenses
Yeah,
to get an image.
sounds very cumbersome.
Yes. So after this, he actually, Louis Le Prince actually went on to invent a single lens camera in 1888. He used it to make the movie Round Hay Garden Scene, which honestly, lots of and by movie, I mean, you're not going to be able to see this in the theater, but a lot of his movies were like literal scenes titled like man walking, train moving. This Round Hay Garden Scene, it's just people in a garden, just like dancing or walking around. And
yeah, a lot of movies back then were just like something moving. Like that,
Right.
that was everyone goes to the theater and watches a train coming towards you.
yeah,
Like that's
Like,
the
there's
fucking
no-
movie back then.
well, this is actually even precursor to theaters. This most of the time, and we'll get into that later, but all of the motion pictures that he made, Louis Le Prince, were shot on gelatin or on glass plates. So they
Wow.
weren't actually shot on like cellulose film yet.
Damn, I know a lot of cartoon Disney movies were shot on glass plates or painted on glass plates, like the backgrounds, and then the animation was like superimposed over it.
Really?
Yeah,
Holy shit, that's
that's
awesome.
how they shot a lot of like Cinderella, Snow White, like 30s, 40s, 50s cartoon movies.
Do you think that was like a cost thing or?
It definitely wasn't a costing because it was very expensive.
Well, yeah, if you're hand drawing on different plates.
So they would make like a giant piece of glass, like very long piece of glass, and just like slowly move it through the frame as like a background that's moving. And then they would draw, like normally they would draw like the person, each individual frame, but the backgrounds were the glass frames.
So they essentially were stagnant.
Yes.
That's interesting. So at this point, after Le Prince does his shit, in comes our boy, William Freeze Green, who we talked about in our 3D movie episode. Probably don't remember, but we talked about this guy because he was one of the first people to come up with like the stereoscope that ends up becoming 3D film. So Green started to experiment with using oiled paper for film projection, but he ended up using celluloid. So he patented a camera to make use of celluloid film, but in 1890, while he was demonstrating it, it was a complete failure. It was horrible frame rate, and it was very unreliable. So after his failure in that, Thomas Edison, who honestly, I feel like he's a part of basically like every innovative story during this time frame, like late 1800s, early 1900s.
He's kind
It
of
was
like
Edison
He's kind of like the John Taffer of the
inventing world.
Yeah, he's like, "Oh, your idea sucks. Well, let me tinker with it a little bit. Let's see if I can make something of it."
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's definitely it. He instead of being a bar expert who's opened thousands of bars, he's like, I've patented over 10,000 items.
Yeah, exactly.
Unfortunately for Mr. Green, Thomas Edison did not go and help him out. He was just like, oh, okay, I see what's going on right now. And he was involved with the creation of what was called the kinetograph. So it actually wasn't Thomas Edison, really. It was his employee, W.K.L. Dixon, who patented it and was able to use 35 millimeter wide celluloid film strips.
Nice.
So, if anything, it's actually an employee of the Edison company that uses what is essentially like the standard film format.
That's crazy. He probably sent out his intern. He's like, "Hey, this shit's beneath me. Like, go check out this film thing."
Yeah, so this actually became a huge success within the Edison company. And Thomas Edison himself revealed the camera and the film in the 1893 World's Fair as the kinetoscope. So he was like, kinetograph, it's an Edison thing now, so it's not going to be kinetoscope. But interestingly enough, the films could only be viewed through a peephole in the camera.
That sounds like the start of some shady shit.
Yeah. So it's funny because the first commercial exhibition of film was in 1894 when the Kinetoscope Peep Show Parlor opened.
I could just see the start of it. It's like some guy's like, "Hey, you, come look through this little hole in this wall here."
You know how the porn industry always is like innovates, is like the whatever the porn industry chooses as far as format, that's like what wins.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like immediately there's no format, absolutely. It's like film or no film, and they're like, you know what, let's stop having sex in front of people and live performances. Let's get into these peep show things.
Yeah. Exactly. And that's how film was born.
Yeah. So funny enough, Edison actually thought there was no money to be made in actual projection of images.
Dumbass.
And didn't invest in it. Yeah. He thought that like the peep show idea would just kind of stick, and that's how it would always be
Why
seen.
wouldn't he think that people would want to see moving pictures at that time? That
Yeah,
nobody
that's
had like
on a mass scale.
There are people alive at that time who had never seen a moving image. Like, don't you think somebody would be like, "Oh my god, I want to see that shit"?
I think he's too rich at this point.
Yeah,
He's like too disconnected. He's like, I see that shit all the time. What do I care?
Yeah, exactly.
So as a surprise to no one, this actually came to bite them in the ass in 1895.
Of course.
Because commercial projection started, and other inventors across the world continued on the route of innovation and within the projection scope. So the following year, Edison's company realized, which again to me seems like a no-brainer, they use projection to large audiences rather than a single consumer in a peep show. Like, if you want more money, you could pay so many more to see your one fucking image.
Yeah, that's like the guy that missed the Bitcoin craze. It's like you could buy 3,000 Bitcoin for 10 cents, and he's like, "Nah, I'm good." It's like this is how Edison fucked up with the whole film thing.
Honestly, I'm gonna bring it because that seems like there's a risk involved. It's like a penny stock, right? A Bitcoin. This is like seeing the car and being like, no, my horse is more reliable, and not investing in automobiles.
True. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Like, dude, Captain Nemo and League of Extraordinary Gentlemen had an automobile. You knew that shit was going to catch on. Odd reference to anyone who's seen League of Extraordinary Gentlemen.
I think everybody's seen that, but nobody remembers it.
That he had a car and everyone
The
else had
movie
horses?
in general. I'm talking about the movie in general.
It's a very forgettable movie.
I've seen it 3 times, and I don't remember one fucking scene from that movie.
I feel like it was a good movie, but I digress.
It was a movie.
So yeah, despite all this kind of like last minute realizations by Edison's company, ironically, Edison helped standardize the usage of 35 millimeter film, and along with the Lumiere company, with their newly created projector, standardized the 16 frames per second for film.
Damn. That wasn't the original like 8 or something, or 10 or something like that. So 16 is
6.
Yeah, so 16 is like groundbreaking back then.
Yeah.
We'll get into it later, but it's basically like HFR, but in a good way.
So the late 1890s were interesting because most films were showcased by cameramen locally after they finished. So cameraman goes out, he films something, and then he just starts showing it to people like in a fair or as a traveling salesman or whatever. After he basically showcases it to an on-site audience, the prints were sent back to the company, and they basically made a, like, if you will, a straight to VHS for anyone who is interested in purchasing. So a guy goes out, he, films sun rising, and then he sends that over, and then the company's like, all right, we're going to make a bunch of sun rising movies, and we'll sell it to the highest bidder, or not to the highest bidder, but we'll sell it to the consumer, or to like other companies who are interested in basically showing it off themselves. So what I've learned is it turns out that home theater still reigns supreme than going to the movies even back then, before they were even a thing.
Yeah, fuck going to the movies.
So yeah, you obviously had to be quite wealthy to purchase these prints, never mind showcase them at home. And prints were actually sold by the foot, and they were sold on average 15 cents per foot, which back then, that's a lot.
Was Kodak already making film at this point? Like, is film mass produced at this point?
Well, no, it was not mass produced, and Kodak is a Japanese company, so Japan was very much in the Stone Age in the 1890s.
Okay, that makes sense. And then they were about to get into some shit later on, so yeah, that
Exactly.
makes sense.
Yeah. So, but it's funny because the more popular subjects were actually sold 2 to 3 times more per foot. So,
Ooh,
figure you're going over 50 cents per foot. That's
that's like a mortgage right there to
Yeah,
get
it
a
is.
fucking reel of film.
So it's interesting because the most popular way to view movies wasn't originally in the theater, although they had been exhibited in existing theaters and music halls, but instead they actually were shown within various storefronts. And this kind of blew my dick off a little bit because these storefronts that showcased movies were called Nickelodeons.
What?
Because it cost a nickel, which makes sense why the fuck Nickelodeon is a channel on TV. Never understood what that meant. I thought that was like a
God.
word like Google, but apparently it's not.
Yeah,
Named after a Nickelodeon, where you pay a nickel to see a movie in a store.
that's insane because that's a kid's channel. So like, how is a kid gonna be like, oh, I understand what that means? Like, I never
Yeah.
got that.
Oh yes, in the 1890s, that was a famous way to go to the movies.
Yeah, exactly.
That's one sophisticated as fuck child.
Or pretentious.
So another thing that kind of blew my dick off, and I honestly thought this came in later, but color in movies happened in the early 1900s.
Really?
Yeah. So the method that they used was actually called kinemacolor, and they added red and green filters so that any colors being filmed that fell within that spectrum would essentially pop. What you really got was exactly what you'd expect, which was film that looked as if there were filters on top of it
Yeah.
that looked green and red. There was a shit ton of color flicker because of the fact that if something is moving rapidly from basically from one filter to the next, it's like just jumping all over the place because it's not a stagnant thing that's happening.
Yeah. Yeah.
So because of all this, Technicolor came into play, and they actually came up with the idea to project the color simultaneously. For example, Kinemacolor, you go from red to green, green to red. Technicolor, you're projecting both simultaneously, thus eliminating any sort of color flicker. But as we know, Technicolor is still very much in play.
Yeah.
They further developed subtractive color and used a beam splitter within the camera to filter red and green images simultaneously onto 2 pieces of 35 millimeter film.
That's interesting. Beam splitter is what they use for teleprompters now.
Yes. So they were so after once the colored image is onto 2 pieces of 35 millimeter film, like literally one part is on the red, one part is on the green. So once the image was filmed, they were then chemically toned and they were glued together base to base to make a single strip of film. And the first film to use it throughout the movie was The Black Pirate in 1926.
Damn, that actually sounds like too recent to have like legitimate editing practices done on film.
Yes, yeah, they basically would cut it and then glue it together. But what's funny is that the projector heat would actually make the movie out of focus because of the distortion to the fused film strips. So you would get pretty decent color for the time, 1920s. It's not by any means like the color how you would see in the 50s and in more recent
Right.
films when color was starting to come into play.
Yeah.
But it still was pretty decent. But yeah, you'd see that, but then the movie would slowly start to lose focus. And unfortunately, because of this, by 1928, when they fixed the process to a single strip of film, so no more having to fuse it together, it was just way too expensive to produce a movie in color. because it actually costs 3 times as much more than in black and white.
Damn. And that was back when people didn't give a shit about if it was in black and white or color.
Right. Like this just it blew my mind, because imagine if most movies that we know that are in black and white, not because they were purposely made in black and white, but like classic movies like Casablanca, like all like the classic like horror creatures like Dracula, Creature of the Black Lagoon, all those things. I mean, those are later, right?
My favorite black and white movie is Mr. Smith Goes to Washington.
Okay. Imagine if that was in color.
1938, I think.
Like, imagine if all those things were in color. That's insane to me.
Yeah,
that's insane to me that it was possible.
It's very weird to think that that movie could be in color, because filmmakers back then shot. They shot the movie and they did the cinematography for the movie to specifically be in black and white. So
right.
The fact that it could be colorized, like Wizard of Oz is, that was originally shot in black and white. So the fact that it could be in color is like very odd to think about. And I know the first prints of the color version of Wizard of Oz looked fucking terrible.
Yeah, because
it's basically like some marker on film.
Yeah, and I know when they like color black and white things, that's basically what it looks like. It looks like someone just drew on it.
Yeah, and that's pretty much what they do.
Yeah, it's just crazy to me that it was just too expensive to produce, and that's kind of why we know old movies as being black and white movies.
Yeah,
because at this time, the old movies that are black and white were the ones that literally were man sitting on a chair, a woman walking in the park, train moving. Like those were the movies. From then on, it's like normal actual movies could have been color, and they instead went with black and white. So by the 30s, color was non-existent until Technicolor was able to create a new beam splitter that enabled the camera to record 3 primary colors. So that's yellow, cyan, and magenta. The negatives that captured the light were printed onto gelatin matrix films. So a matrix film is essentially what is inside the lens that is able to quote unquote see the color. The matrix would then be color soaked in its respective color. So 3 different types of matrix. I don't know if in this case it'd be a matrices or matrices.
I would say matri.
I don't think that's right.
That doesn't sound right.
I'm pretty sure that one is 100%
As soon as I said
wrong.
it, I was like, that is not right.
So yeah, 3 matrices are matrices. One in cyan, one in magenta, one in yellow. Color soaked, put in the camera. So everything, the light that is essentially going through the lens is being picked up with that color.
Right.
And at this point, the color process was essentially flawless. And the first film to use it was an animated short by Disney, which was Flowers and Trees in 1932. This led to much more vivid colors, much more variation of colors. You had essentially, because they reduced, instead of just doing, red, blue, red, green, you bring it to magenta, cyan, yellow. You're lessening the colors, but by that, you're opening up to a whole new range. And that's basically how, with that subtractive coloring, they were able to basically, it's ironic that subtractive coloring gives you way more color, which is exactly what they did.
It doesn't sound like it should make sense, but
it does.
I guess it just works.
It does. It does. Now that we have how color was translated onto film, I wanted to talk, and this is going to be more of a brief thing because this is where things get really technical and very, very confusing. And that's when it comes to sound in film. So sound in film was always something that garnered significant interest. But at the time, it was almost impossible to include sound in movies just because of synchronization issues.
Yep.
The 2 main companies for sound film at the time were Vitaphone and Movietone. And Vitaphone was sponsored by Warner Brothers. They used the process of simply recording sound separately onto a disc and having it sync during presentation via the projector. So for the most part, because cameras and I'm sure cameras now are noisy,
right? The
camera would be in a glass booth, and then the recording microphone would be out where the actors were performing.
Right.
once that was done, the editor would take the sound, mix it himself, and then you'd basically have the film and then the soundtrack, which would contain music, vocals, sound effects, all that bullshit.
Right.
And they would have to sync it together.
That's crazy, honestly, because
Yeah.
that's how it works today. Like I'm specifically talking about IMAX cameras because they are extremely loud. I'm sure they are louder than the cameras back then, and they have to really be careful when they're recording audio while there's an IMAX camera filming because it's so fucking loud that you
Really?
can't capture any audio while it's recording.
That's crazy to me. I think cameras would not make noise at all, but I guess I'm wrong.
Yeah, the film cameras, especially that 70 millimeter IMAX camera, is like insanely loud.
Now I gotta look up a YouTube video of how it sounds. This led to their downfall because of synchronization, editing, and distribution.
Yeah.
The cost of distribution was way too high. Basically, if you think about it,
For films with
they
sound?
had to, for films with sound at the time, because you had to, one, transport the film and then transport the soundtrack.
Yeah.
And apparently the soundtracks would always get damaged a lot. So they had to make extras for in case they got damaged on site. So essentially you're sending one film with 5 additional soundtracks.
Jesus.
The cost is going to get high.
Yeah, that makes sense. So is it somebody like in a projector booth just like hitting the buttons at the same time to try to get them to sync up properly, and that's how it's getting fucked up?
Right. And
Jeez.
this is crazy to people probably now, but projectionists at the time need to be highly accurate and skilled to synchronize the recording. Without that, things could go to shit real quick. For the most part, if it was running correctly, it was pretty flawless. But if there was a small, just minor detail that was missed, it was embarrassingly catastrophic. So
That was like when we covered 3D, and it was they didn't make the projectors synchronized at the exact same time. It would be completely fucked up and unwatchable.
yeah, and people
Same
were
with audio.
puking.
It's the same with audio.
I mean, you're watching a movie and it goes from English with everyone talking normal, and then it goes straight to 1970s Chinese karate movie with English dubbing. That's how quick that could fall.
That happens to me. So we were watching, don't fucking judge me for this. I was sitting there, Kathy was watching the Twilight series on
The Twilight Zone?
Twilight, like with Kristen Stewart and
Oh,
yeah,
okay. This is the vampires and werewolves. Okay.
Right. So
What team are you on?
No team at all, because they're all terrible.
Okay.
So she's watching it on the Xbox One, the Blu-ray version of it, because we have, of course, bought all the Blu-rays. And the audio is not syncing properly. I'm like, this is unwatchable. This is fucking bullshit. And she's like, I don't even notice it.
And the voice dubbing is off too.
Yeah, and I'm like, for some reason, the Xbox One, sometimes the audio gets off on Blu-rays. And as soon as I said it, she's like, God damn it, I can't fucking watch this anymore.
Yeah. Even if it's a millisecond and you notice it, it's done. It's done. You can't watch it.
Yeah, I feel bad for saying something because she didn't notice it up until that point.
Just ruined it for her.
I did.
That's okay. But yeah, as far as synchronizing, when it came to editing, it was basically impossible. They would have to
That would be a fucking nightmare.
Yeah. So in this case, they have to re-record what they wanted to splice in at the exact moment.
Oh my God.
So say you have a line of dialogue that is being taken out of the movie. You have to re-record everything up to that point to cut it out and splice it into the part that you want to do it and record.
I do not envy that editor. If there was one thing that I learned in film school, it is your video could be complete dog shit. Quality, horrible movie, completely fucking terrible. But if your audio is on point, you're golden. Like, that is the biggest part of movies nowadays, especially. And the fact that they had so many audio issues back then, it really makes me think like they're fucking gods. The editors back then are fucking gods because they
You're
were able
cutting
to
things
edit
with like scissors.
Yeah, scissors and glue. Like they were using the shit that a fucking 5-year-old's using nowadays.
Yeah. And then in this case, they're using vinyl records and then re-recording a vinyl record to
Yeah.
have movie audio onto it. With all these problems, Movietone got it right. They pioneered with optical sound. So the sound was recorded right onto the film via print of the actual waveform.
How fucking time.
Yeah, so if you think about how audio looks, it's just a bunch of waves,
Right.
and that was printed on the edge of the film strip. I don't really know how. I tried looking it up.
Really?
It's
That is-
confusing as fuck. I don't know how the hell
That's
they did it.
crazy.
Yeah, but it's very technical. So they were able to do it. What's crazy is they used a electric lamp that would shine through the waveform. As it's read via an electric signal, and that electric signal, based on a picture, is able to convert it and amplify it into analog sound.
Jesus.
That's how optical sound started. And I mean, shit, we still use it for DVD or CDs, and
Yeah.
DVDs.
And I know that is still used on film today. That movies that are shot on film, which isn't very much actually. So I'm going to go over the digital aspect of filmmaking nowadays, and I'm going to jump way far ahead. So I think you stopped in like the 30s or 40s.
Yeah, 30s, 40s.
The digital aspect, I know nothing really happens in terms of like crazy innovations with film from then until the 80s.
Oh yeah, aside from 3D.
Yeah,
You can listen
3D,
to that in our
you know,
episode. for
Things get
3D.
smaller. You know how normal innovations work. It's like, they figure out how to make it smaller. So digital filmmaking actually starts in the 80s, which I thought was fucking crazy because you think of digital and you're like, oh, early 2000s on.
I was
going to
say late 90s.
Yeah. So, making movies with film is called cinematography, and if you didn't know that, that's pretty common knowledge. But making movies with digital cameras or digital devices is called digital cinematography, and that's kind of the phrase that they coined in the mid 2000s.
So my question is, what does the cinematographer do exactly?
The
Is he the one that
cinematographer is
sets up a
responsible.
shot?
The cinematographer, in my opinion, is the most skilled and important person on a movie set. So they are responsible for lighting the set, filming, getting the angles correct, and getting the sound combined with the video aspect of it.
Okay.
So, in the late 1980s, digital cinematography starts to kind of evolve. Sony is a big proponent in the digital cinematography, and they start to make these HDVS video cameras, which is basically it's not digital in the sense that we think about it like a digital recording onto a card. It's still a digital recording, but it's onto a tape.
Okay.
So it's digital onto an analog medium still.
That reminds me of the camera that Marty McFly uses when he's filming the Time Machine
Right.
at the mall.
And that's the
A camera like that.
That's the very start of the digital cinematography age. Is like that point, and it was still very new. They were right when they hit that mark, but it was still very new, and pretty much nobody was using it at that point.
Right.
In 1987, the movie Julia and Julia was the first movie to use scenes that were shot completely on digital cameras. So it's basically like we have today with the IMAX stuff, with like The Dark Knight, where there's a couple scenes that are filmed on an IMAX camera.
Right. Is it because of cost? Is that what?
Yeah, it was cost, and it was the...
I think with like The Dark Knight, when you were saying with like IMAX scenes, they do it for like big action set pieces.
Right.
I can't imagine that Julia and Julia is having like a big action set piece where they're like, we need to have these scenes digital. These must be really intense scenes that they decided to switch from film to the digital.
Yeah, it's crazy because this is the first movie that is credited with having like an HD high definition scene in it.
And it's just like a drama movie.
It's a drama, and mainly they shot this way because the cost of editing in digital was extremely high at that point because you need a computer to edit digital footage.
Right.
So
fucking 80s computer to edit movies.
Yeah.
I don't even know how that looks.
Yeah. So in 1996, the movie Rainbow was the first film to exclusively use digital post-production, which is basically recording onto a computer, editing it digitally, and then rendering it back onto a digital copy and then back onto film.
Interesting. So how did they convert it from film to digital?
So they
To
took
edit it.
They transferred the digital copy onto what's called an internegative, which basically is a way to put an analog medium onto a computer. At that point, it was fucking insanely expensive. Like owning a computer back then was like nobody owned a computer,
Right.
and only like Intel and Apple owned computers back
IBM
then.
and shit like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is crazy because I imagine things are going to be expensive because you're basically paying for wizardry
Yeah,
and witchcraft. It's like a negative that turns things into computer programming. That's fucking crazy.
Exactly. I'm thinking like, okay, so Rainbow was 1996, and this is like the pinnacle of digital editing and visual effects. And I'm like, this is 3 years after Jurassic Park has come out, and that shit. I don't know if you've seen that recently, but that shit still holds up.
Oh, I've seen it recently,
And I know
just
it's
added it to my list on Netflix again.
I know it's animatronic, but there's a lot of visual effects stuff on there that still holds up to this day.
How the fuck do you do that?
Do
you make it on a computer and then print it and then put it on film?
Yes. They basically...
Oh, wow. I'm surprised I got that right.
Yes, they basically take it from the computer and print it back onto film. And that's how they did it up until the early 2000s. When they were still making movies on film, they were transferring it from film to digital on the computer to edit, and then transferring it back from the computer back to film to be
That's crazy.
distributed to theaters.
That's crazy.
So in 1998, that's right about the time that I got into filmmaking, and that was like the first time that I got a camcorder, and it was an HD cam, and that was like groundbreaking at the time because that was...
Oh, I remember.
That was the first time that they had 1920 by 1080, and that was like the very first time that it was like consumer level or professional / consumer level HD cinematography. It was available on the market. So later that year, the movie The Last Broadcast, which I've never fucking heard of in my life. I've never seen it.
I feel like that's the movies they use to pioneer certain things. You know?
Right. It's like the Ang
It's like,
Lee.
this movie's not gonna...
Yeah. Yeah, it's like the Ang Lee movies. That movie was the very first movie to be completely made in digital format. And pretty much nobody saw it because I've never fucking heard of the movie.
I got a conspiracy theory for these movies that are pioneers in certain things.
What's that?
Like, granted, I've never heard of The Black Pirate in 1926. I don't know any movies from basically earlier than 1950s, probably.
Earlier than the Goonies, basically. Yeah.
I'm thinking that they're making the movie or writing, and director writer just knows this movie's going to be shit. Let's call up those guys that want to experiment with various technology, and who knows, maybe this movie won't be remembered, but maybe it'll be remembered for being the first to use sound, the first to use color, the first to use digital HDR or whatever.
It's like they think that this movie might be terrible, but at least it's going to go down in the record books.
Yeah, for something.
Yeah. So on to 1999, and John, I'm going to ask you this question. Who do you think is the pioneer of digital filmmaking in the year 1999?
M. Night Shyamalan.
It is not M. Night Shyamalan. So in the year 1999, George Lucas, of all people,
I that was going to be my second one.
releases...
I was going to go with George Lucas, but I thought it was too easy.
So George Lucas releases this little indie film called The Phantom Menace, and it has a few scenes with digital cinematography. And
Do you know which scenes?
the pod racing scene and
Makes sense. That makes sense.
oh fuck, what was the other scene? I can't remember the other scene, but definitely the pod racing scene.
Well, that's like all CGI, so it's probably way easier
It makes sense.
and not having to retranslate it to be. But wait, you're saying it was filmed and made digitally, or
It
was
was
it put
made-
back onto film?
No, it was filmed digitally and then edited digitally and then put back onto film. So
Okay, see, that seems easier.
Yes.
You should just do that
Yes.
if you're going to do that. Yeah.
So after the movie released and it was obviously a huge hit, he basically said, I'm going to release every movie I ever do on completely 100% digital.
That was a mistake.
So he's like, yeah, the next movie, episode 2, Attack of the Clones, going to be digital. So Attack of the Clones releases in 2000 and then the sequel releases in 2002. Both of them are completely 100% shot on digital cameras, edited digitally, and released back onto film.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So
Did they not have digital projectors
no,
yet at the time?
no, they did
Okay.
not have
All right.
digital
Well, then
projectors.
That makes sense.
So fast forward from 2002 onto 2009, which is like the first innovation for digital filmmaking, which is insane to me. Like I was in film school in 2006, and I feel like digital was like at the forefront of everything.
Right.
Apparently not in Hollywood, because in 2009, Slumdog Millionaire became the first movie nominated for an Academy Award for Best Cinematography. It was
And that
shot
was all
completely on
digital.
digital. Yes.
Okay, so that's a history that isn't a shitty movie and remembered.
Right. Yeah, that's like the first movie that has some innovations in it and is actually very good.
Yeah.
So that same year, Avatar was not only shot on digital camera, but we talked about it in the 3D episode. It had some groundbreaking advancements in the 3D technology, which is, it's crazy to think about that. Not only was it a digital, like one of the first 100% digitally shot movies, but it was also the forefront of like the 3D craze.
And I still think it may be at the forefront because James Cameron just invents this shit.
Yeah. It's crazy because it's like 100% digital, and that's like unheard of at this time. And it's like, oh, by the way, he made this fucking 3D rig that is like constantly used nowadays for shooting 3D movies.
James Cameron is like Thomas Edison now.
He's like a double innovator with digital cinematography and also 3D at the same time.
Yep, it's crazy.
So in 2012, we get the movie that everybody fucking hates.
2012.
2012, the Hobbit series in
Oh god.
high frame rate HFR. And I don't know about you, but I saw the movie in HFR and I fucking I could not stand it in HFR.
I couldn't stand it either. I couldn't stand the movie as a Lord of the Rings fan. I couldn't stand the movie, and I thought it looked like it was fast forwarded for a time and a half.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but like, so I have an HD TV that has 240 hertz. Immediately, as soon as I get a TV that has that, I turn it off because I can't stand it.
I don't think I have 240 hertz, but I can't stand it regardless. I think it looks terrible.
Every time I am in somebody's house that has that turned on, which is very often actually, I'm like, man, turn that shit off. Like, I don't want to watch a fast forwarded commercial or Netflix show or something.
Yeah, I can't stand it. That's like how if you remember how the Blu-rays used to look.
Yes.
They
Yes.
got rid of that bullshit.
They did,
I always thought it
yes.
looked weird.
If you don't know, HFR is 48 frames a second. A normal standard movie is shot
30.
in 24
Oh.
frames a second.
24, really?
Yeah, actually 23.976 if you want to get technical about it.
I do want to get technical.
TV, you're actually close. TV is shot in 30 frames a second. So anything you watch on
Okay.
TV, Netflix,
That
is 30.
makes sense why it seems so different.
Yeah,
you always get a feel where it's okay, this is a TV feel. Even if it's on HBO, you know it's on TV.
Right.
And if you watch a movie, Which this not to get off on a little tangent, but this season in Westworld, they went from movie.
Don't fucking
quality.
spoil it for me. I haven't watched.
No,
it
no,
yet.
I'm not.
Okay.
I'm not. But like in certain scenes, they go and you can tell it's specifically movie quality, 23.796 frames per second, and then it jumps back to 30. So
It's 9.
makes a little more sense.
Yes, it's because TVs at the time that they were making like sitcoms and stuff, like 90s, late 90s, the TVs can handle 30 frames a second better.
Okay.
So moving on to film, it's like, you know, you get that little shutter look because it's a little slower, and that's honestly like what I respect about the film aspect of it. You know, like when you see like
It's a slower process, more refined,
Right.
more tasteful.
right, and I'll get into
TV's
that.
just rust.
Right, yes, exactly. In late 2013, Paramount became the first major studio to distribute movies to theaters in the digital format, basically eliminating the 35 millimeter film entirely.
Shame.
And actually, the last movie that Paramount ever produced in film was Anchorman 2.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
And it's crazy because the first movie, so Anchorman 2 was the last movie. The first movie that Paramount distributed digitally was The Wolf of Wall Street.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I guess it goes to show that I can't really tell the difference. I'm not a huge like cinephile like that. Although if someone's like, "Oh, it's coming out in 35 or 70 millimeters," which I still don't really know the difference, I'm like, "Oh, I'm into that. I'll go see it in 35 or 70 millimeter."
35 is any movie that you see. 70 millimeters is IMAX. That's the giant screen that you would see.
Okay. Okay.
This kind of segues into the distribution of digital films. And back in 2005, a bunch of studios got together and came up with a digital cinema specification for distributing these movies. It was a joint venture between Disney, Fox, MGM, Paramount, Sony, Universal, and Warner Brothers. So basically every studio.
I was going to say every studio ever.
Basically every studio ever agreed to how they're going to distribute these movies. And it basically encompasses 2K and 4K releases for now.
So are we in the age of 4K?
Yes, we are in the age of 4K, but there's occasionally movies released in 8K, 6K, just because the technology is there. Well, like there's cameras nowadays that can shoot as high as 12K, which is insane. Like it's ridiculous. And those movies are still like downscaled to 4K to be released this way, but yeah, it basically, like when you're editing a movie that's larger, like let's say you go back to the 1080p aspect and you want to release it in 720p, you have a little more room around the entire frame of the movie to basically do what you want with it. If you want to have it offset a little bit, you have a little room with it. And that's kind of how it is when you shoot on like 12K and you're releasing it in 4K.
Well, I feel as if some theaters, even today, aren't equipped to even just, project in 4K. Because I go to a special theater that is a Dolby Atmos theater,
right,
with the sound and with 4K laser projection.
Right, and that was actually.
So I guess I am a cinema
cinephile. Yeah,
yeah.
That was kind of some of the concern that theater owners had from switching from film to digital was not only the cost, but the fact that how would this be distributed? Right. So back when theaters were switching, they basically subsidized digital prints and charged a cheaper fee for them to change from film distribution to digital distribution. And I know like Disney nowadays just like emails you a fucking file of the movie that is like date locked, so you can't open it until the release date of the movie, and it's just like
wait. You're telling me that movie theaters get an email from the studio?
Yeah, that's like a rudimentary.
movie?
Yeah, that's a rudimentary just description of how it goes, but it's basically a secure network.
I'm assuming Disney. So in this example, Disney emails like AMC corporate, and then
Right.
AMC corporate distributes it to theaters.
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Yes.
I thought it was like some fucking 16-year-old, 17-year-old
but it's
kid
not
at the
like,
theater's
hey-
like, oh, I got an email from Disney. All right, I got to get this ready for
No.
Friday showing.
It's not like an email to a Yahoo account. It's like a secured
Network.
digital film network where only these, Regal, AMC, Harkins, like they're all in on this network. They can open they can open the file, but not until the actual release date. So that was like some of the perks of changing from film to digital is like, oh, you don't have to get a shipment of a fucking 10 cans of a film
Right.
that you need to roll into a projector to run 10 times a day. It's like you just double click on this, click play, and then you can run all your commercials
Chill.
beforehand. Yeah, it's like you just gotta sit there and chill. But some of the major problems with digital are the fact that it just doesn't look like film at all. And when you watch, and I'm specifically thinking of like Pulp Fiction or Reservoir Dogs, because those are definitely shot on film. Those have the film grain, like you can look at a
You
film.
get the look.
You can look at a film and you can tell like, okay, that's shot on film. Nowadays, you don't get that. So I recently watched Jurassic World. That's the most recent movie that I watched, Jurassic World 2. And it does not have the film look. Like you can tell this is shot 100% on digital. There's no grain. It's just a file, like a movie file.
Okay.
So
A .mp4.
yeah. So that's like some of the problems that actual filmmakers have with this, because think what you want, but filmmakers are artists, and they want to choose their medium based off of how they want their style to look. And Quentin Tarantino and Christopher Nolan have been very outspoken about not using digital. They hate the way that it looks. It's too clean. And basically, Christopher Nolan came out and said that movies shot on digital, the only reason that the filmmaking community is moving to digital is because
Ease of use.
not necessarily ease of use, but like they want. He's basically blaming the film industry for wanting to change formats just solely for money.
My question is, in this case, Christopher Nolan and Quentin Tarantino, when they're doing post-production, they have to be doing that digitally?
Yes. So in my experience, I've only ever worked on one project that was shot on film, and it was the worst experience of my career because shooting on film, that shit has to be developed. So they have to shoot it on film. You can't, it has to be developed in a dark room. You shoot it on film, you send it to a dark room, develop it, and then you can see what you just recorded. With digital, that's the majority of the stuff that I've worked on. You shoot it, you can immediately look at what you've just shot, see, oh shit, it's out of focus, so let's reshoot it. And that's like the majority of why you would want digital nowadays.
I would assume, though, for a huge production that the turnaround time is quite short.
Right. Turnaround time is great for digital, but there are some issues with...
No, I'm saying for film.
For film, yes. Turnaround time is insane. Like, it takes weeks to... Like, you can...
But for a big production, I would think it would be, all right, we shot for the day, we're going to sleep, and overnight they're going to develop all that.
Yeah,
shit.
usually. So when you shoot on, let's say, film, usually get something back that's very rough, and it's called dailies, and you review that, and it's just usually a black and white version of what you'd shot for the day, and it's just a horrible quality, but you can only see what you shot, and it's very, very expensive. So the issue with shooting on digital is not only is it horrible for shooting fast motion action scenes, it's horrible in any environment that has dust or snow or pretty much anything that's not suburbs, like a city or something.
Right, because it's less visible.
Right. So the DP for Inception basically said,
Director of photography for those people that don't know.
yeah, director of photography for Inception said, 1 out of 6 shots for Inception was shot on a digital camera.
Just to see how it was.
Right. And this is just talking about action scenes. They never used a digitally shot action scene. Out of 6 times they shot on the Photosonic 35 millimeter camera, they used every shot from that.
Wow. So
every time you see an action scene in Inception, it's a film shot, because the digital shot scene was just unusable.
Fuck.
And it's crazy because Michael Bay, like the fucking godfather of digital shit, had to shoot most of Transformers Dark of the Moon in 35 millimeter cameras because digital was so shitty. It was it was completely unusable because of the dust, and 2, it could not handle the fast movements.
Wow.
So they shot most of the action scenes in film.
That's insane to me.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I'm almost like, this is like not a true fact, but
So I honestly think that digital has a long ways to go, and I know Quentin Tarantino and Christopher Nolan are hugely outspoken about how horrible they think that digital is, and Christopher Nolan has basically come out and said that the film industry is using digital because they basically want to change and get the money from using digital, from everybody switching to digital, that filmmakers aren't considered artists anymore. It's just like basically a digital medium nowadays.
right.
Whereas using film, there's a lot more work that goes into using film. There's a lot more, you really have to think out a shot before you shoot something on film, because it costs so much money to develop the film and edit the film and transfer it back to film. Like it's crazy how much work goes into shooting on film nowadays.
So do you think film is dying?
Well, Quentin Tarantino said that as soon as digital becomes the standard for filmmaking, he's going to retire.
Wow.
And I think that's coming very soon. But I honestly think that digital cinematography needs to advance greatly very soon, or we're going to go back to film, because the digital filmmaking is it's so hit or miss right now. Like with Jurassic World 2 Fallen Kingdom, or whatever the fuck it's called, like it does not have the film look, and it does not look like a film. Like the whole time that I'm watching, I'm like, this doesn't look like a fucking movie to me, because it's so CGI, it's so digital, everything's so digital in it. Like I want to see those movies shot on film. And as much as I hated working with film, I love seeing movies on film.
Yeah, you're like, let someone else suffer. Well, it's funny because this kind of helped me transition. It's funny, all things begin and end with format wars.
Yeah.
It's always something. So, Kevin, I have a question for you before we wrap things up. Out of the more popular format wars, which do you think was the most catastrophic?
Okay.
Zune versus Apple, Betamax versus VHS, or HD DVD versus Blu-ray?
Okay, I can honestly say that I still own a Zune, and
that's funny. I think I knew someone that owned a Zune too, and I remember when they got it, they were like, "This is gonna be the best thing. Apple's done."
You know what's funny? My first Black Friday experience, I waited in line with a friend so he could buy a Zune, and I honestly haven't picked up my Zune in like 10 years.
God.
But I don't think that's the worst. I think the worst is HD DVD versus Blu-ray, because Microsoft and Xbox specifically really tried to adopt the whole HD DVD thing.
Yep, they did.
And it was such an epic failure that now the Xbox One has a Blu-ray player in it.
Yep.
It's like they admitted defeat in this.
Yeah, I'm going to have to disagree with you on this one for once. I'm going to have to go with the VHS Betamax.
Wow.
Because Sony was so confident in this. This was like the precursor before Sony was the victor in the Blu-ray.
Right.
Sony was very confident with Betamax, and they were demolished.
You know what's crazy?
Demolished.
Yeah, you know what's
VHS.
crazy about VHS and Betamax is Betamax was exponentially better quality than VHS.
It was.
But it only held like an hour of footage.
Yeah.
So VHS was like, okay, we can hold 2 hours of footage. How much porn can we fit on this? 2 hours? All right. It goes back to the whole
I'm sure it
porn
came
thing.
down to that. I'm sure it came down to that.
It did, actually. It came down to the porn thing. Like, who did porn pick? VHS. That's who won.
Blu-ray? So Sony was like, we'll wait till higher quality is more in demand.
Yeah.
And then porn was like, we need higher quality porn. So they picked Blu-ray.
I think the next quality wars for video, they got to get the porn industry involved.
And film.
Because porn is, whoever porn picks, like, that's the winner.
Yeah. And I'm pretty sure porn isn't filmed on legitimate film.
No.
So it's not looking good.
It's not looking good for 35 millimeter film. Unless they start filming in 70 millimeter fucking IMAX shit.
Yeah. Well, to everyone that stuck around, thanks again for listening. We really appreciate it. Keep in mind that you can always catch us on other podcast outlets such as Stitcher Radio, Google Play, as well as YouTube for our audio version only. And for all your Wicked Hot status updates and news, please give the show a follow on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Wicked Hot Talk, as well as our respective Twitter and Instagram handles in case you want to know what we're up to. But we hope to see you guys again next Monday. And I guess that's it, Kevin.
Yeah, that's it. Bye, everybody.